The clock showed the start of another decisive day as Michelle walked through the glass doors of Liberty Foundation. The lobby was busy, filled with people rushing back and forth, barely glancing at one another. The hum of small talk and the clicking of heels echoed throughout the space. Although most seemed to ignore Michelle as she entered, every step she took held the weight of years of hard work and battles that no one else had seen. She wore a crisp, clean blazer and classic pants, an outfit she had chosen carefully that morning. It was her way of showing she belonged there. Still, as she walked further inside, she caught a few side glances and heard whispers behind her back. Some folks mumbled just loud enough for her to know she wasn't exactly welcome. The discomfort wasn't just in her head. It seemed like even the walls were quietly judging her, pushing back against her presence in ways she couldn't quite describe. But Michelle kept her head high and her back straight. She drew a long breath and reminded herself of how much she had overcome to get here. Whatever prejudice or resistance waited ahead, she wasn't going to let it shake her, not on a day that could shape her future for years to come. As Michelle moved closer to the front desk, she noticed the receptionist, Jennifer, typing away on her keyboard. Jennifer didn't even glance up. Her focus fixed on her screen, as if Michelle hadn't just walked up and stopped right in front of her. The lobby, usually filled with the soft buzz of morning chatter, suddenly felt unusually quiet around them. Michelle waited, hoping for even a small acknowledgement, but Jennifer just kept at her task, making no move to help. After several uncomfortable moments, Michelle cleared her throat, trying to sound as friendly as possible. She introduced herself and explained she was there for the leadership meeting scheduled that morning. Jennifer finally glanced up, her expression unreadable, and listened just long enough to hear Michelle's name. Without bothering to check any guest list or even her calendar, Jennifer simply nodded and told Michelle to wait nearby. Her tone was cold and formal, the kind that makes you feel like a burden more than a guest. The message was clear, even in a place like Liberty Foundation, where progress was supposed to matter. People like Michelle still had to fight just to be treated with basic respect. That quiet, subtle disregard hit harder than any outright insult, putting Michelle's patience and self-worth to the test before her day had even truly begun. Michelle sat quietly in one of the lobby's stiff armchairs, the silence around her broken only by the sound of hurried footsteps and the gentle buzz of a distant coffee machine. She watched the minutes crawl by on the wall clock, feeling as though time had slowed down just to drag out her discomfort. Every employee who passed by seemed to notice her, though none made eye contact for more than a second. Some leaned into each other, whispering as they glanced her way, while others simply looked right through her as if she did not exist. That sense of being an outsider settled on Michelle's shoulders with a familiar weight. She remembered so many moments in her past when people expected her to work twice as hard just to earn half their respect. It would have been easy to give in to frustration or self-doubt, but Michelle reminded herself why she had come in the first place. Each sidelong glance and every cold shoulder only reminded her of the bigger picture. By showing up and refusing to shrink back, she was not only standing up for herself, but for anyone who had ever been made to feel invisible. In that uncomfortable chair, she found a quiet resolve growing inside her. The tension in the lobby reached its peak when Frank, head of security, strode over with heavy steps, his face set in a scowl. He stopped a few feet from Michelle, giving her a long, hard look, one that made it obvious he had already decided she did not belong there. Without listening to her side or even asking for her name, Frank jerked his thumb toward the back hallway and said, in a low voice that carried, "You need to use the service entrance. This area is for guests of the Foundation." His words had less to do with any actual policy and more with an old habit of exclusion that still lived inside buildings like this, no matter how polished they seemed on the outside. Michelle felt a surge of anger, but her voice was steady as she met Frank's eyes. "I am here as an invited guest. If there are questions about that, "I would appreciate someone with authority checking my identity," she said, her tone clear and unwavering. She did not back down, nor did she let his dismissive attitude push her aside. Michelle refused to let herself be erased. She had spent too many years battling just to be seen. This time she stood her ground, showing everyone watching that she would not disappear quietly into the background. For a long moment, no one moved. Michelle could feel every pair of eyes in the lobby fixed on her, the tension hanging in the air like thick fog. Finally, Frank seemed to realize he could not simply dismiss her. With an annoyed sigh and a gruff mutter, he stepped away to call upstairs and double-check Michelle's information. Those around pretended to be busy with their phones or files, but their sideways glances gave away their curiosity. The wide hallway that moments before had been a constant stream of people now felt quiet, as if everyone was waiting for what would happen next. Michelle's heart was racing, but she stood tall and steady, clinging to her dignity. Once Frank departed, she took a slow breath and moved toward the sleek elevator reserved for the leadership team. Her shoes tapped the marble floor with quiet confidence. At that moment, every step felt like its own small victory. It was proof that she would not be turned away. As she reached the elevator and pressed the button, Michelle reminded herself that being there mattered not just for her, but for anyone who might face this kind of hostility. She was determined to keep moving forward, making sure each moment spoke louder than the prejudice she had just confronted. Inside the elevator, Michelle spotted 3 executives in tailored suits, chatting loudly, their voices bouncing off the mirrored walls. The group seemed at ease, talking about last night's baseball game at Yankee Stadium and joking about next week's board dinner. As soon as Michelle approached, their conversation fizzled out. All 3 pairs of eyes turned her way, the atmosphere instantly tense. James, the director of strategy, looked her up and down with a smirk. Without missing a beat, he blurted out, "Did you get lost? Or are you just crashing the big meeting?" The others chuckled, and their laughter seemed to echo through the hallway, reaching the ears of staff lingering nearby. Michelle felt the weight of their sarcasm and the silent message behind it. She did not fit their picture of who belonged in that elevator or that meeting, but instead of letting the comment rattle her, Michelle kept calm. With a steady voice, she replied, "Actually, I was invited to the leadership meeting. Just like you." Her tone was even, not defensive, making it clear that she would not let their thinly veiled bullying knock her off balance. She stepped inside, ignoring the laughter, reminding herself that she had every right to be there. James was not ready to let it go. As the elevator doors slid shut, he folded his arms and met Michelle's gaze with a smug grin. "Seriously, though, are you sure you're on the right floor? This is where the decision-makers go. You might want to double-check before you embarrass yourself." His comment hung in the air, sharp and condescending, meant for anyone listening. His friends tried to stifle their laughter, but they could not hide their amusement at James's attempt to put Michelle in her place. For a second, Michelle felt the sting of embarrassment work its way up her spine, but she refused to react. With her head held high, she looked James straight in the eyes and said, "If you have any doubts, maybe someone on the committee can confirm I am expected, but I know exactly where I am supposed to be." Her calm words cut through the moment, firm but not angry. The others grew quiet, clearly uncomfortable now that Michelle would not play her assigned part in their little joke. By standing steady and demanding to be judged on facts instead of assumptions, she unsettled even the most confident in the group. For the rest of that short elevator ride, nobody had much more to say. As soon as the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, James stepped ahead of Michelle and, loud enough for everyone to hear, waved over one of the junior staff near the reception desk. "Can you do us all a favor and call security up here?" he said, tossing a glance over his shoulder at Michelle like she was an unwelcome guest about to be escorted out. The staff member hesitated, looking nervous. Clearly caught between orders from above and the awkwardness of the situation. The entire hallway felt like it was holding its breath. Other workers nearby paused what they were doing, their eyes darting between Michelle, James, and the reception desk phone. No one was sure whether to step in or stay out of it, but everyone was focused on this escalating standoff. The sense of hostility seemed to thicken the air, every moment stretching out longer than the last. Michelle did not move from where she stood. She straightened her back and kept her head high, refusing even to flinch. In that silent moment, she understood that giving in would be more than just leaving that hallway. It would be giving the green light for future moments like this. As the tension built, it was clear this was about more than her. It was about the type of workplace everyone here wanted to have. The silence pulsed with possibilities, waiting for the scales to tip. Just as the standoff threatened to boil over, Susan, the senior assistant to the board, hurried out from the double doors at the end of the hall. Even though she was clearly busy, her voice cut through the tension with a calm authority. "What exactly is going on here?" she asked, her attention moving from Michelle to James and back again. Without waiting for a reply, she turned to Michelle. "I am so sorry for the misunderstanding. You are expected in the boardroom," she said, her words ringing out for everyone to hear. Turning on James, Susan's tone sharpened. "James, would you care to explain why you felt the need to call security on our special guest?" Her question left no room for excuses. James, who a second ago looked smug, now shifted uncomfortably and stared at his shoes. Not a single person in the hallway missed his sudden change in attitude. When Susan announced that Michelle was a personal invitee of the upper management, a wave of surprise rippled through the onlookers. Some exchanged awkward glances, others simply looked down, embarrassed. The realization that James's actions had been not only unjust, but also completely out of line, hung heavy in the air. In just a few words, Susan revealed more about the company's culture than any training ever had. Susan reached into her bag and pulled out a crisp envelope, its seal marked with the bold logo of the company's head office. With steady hands, she handed it straight to James in front of everyone. "You might want to read this," she said quietly. But everyone could hear her. James looked at the document, his hands suddenly less sure. As he opened it, the stamp and signature from the CEO's own desk were plain as day, making it impossible to doubt. The letter spelled out not only Michelle's invitation, but her crucial role in the day's strategic meeting. Her name was there in bold, listed as a lead presenter expected by all the top executives. The moment James finished reading, his face turned red. Still, he tried to salvage his pride, forcing a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "I was only looking out for the safety of the team," he offered, his tone less confident than before. But this claim fell flat. People who, just minutes earlier, had been laughing at Michelle's expense, now avoided his gaze, realizing the heavy mistake that had been made. The mood in the hallway had changed. What had started as open mockery was replaced by an awkward silence and a shared sense of regret. With Susan by her side, Michelle walked down the long, carpeted hallway toward the boardroom. Even before they pushed open the meeting room doors, Michelle could sense the shift in atmosphere. There was a low hum in the corridor, the kind that spreads after something dramatic happens in a usually quiet office. Heads peeked out from behind cubicle walls and glass doors. Whispers traveled fast, and Michelle knew her uncomfortable moment with James had become the morning's news. Every set of eyes followed her as she crossed the wide open space between the elevator and the main conference room. Still, Susan kept a steady pace, making sure Michelle stayed right beside her. When they reached the heavy glass doors of the boardroom, Susan gave her a quick nod, as if to remind her she belonged here no matter what anyone thought. Inside, the atmosphere was just as charged. Executives around the long table looked up, some with surprise, others more guarded. Michelle could feel the weight of curiosity and judgment, but she did not let it shake her. She cleared her throat, handed the invitation to the meeting chair, and spoke clearly. This was her space now, and she was determined to step into her role as planned, despite everything that had happened before. Just as Michelle handed the invitation to the meeting chair and began to introduce herself, the door swung open again, and James stormed in, his face tense. Without a word, he snatched the official letter from the chair's hands. Then, in a sudden burst of frustration, he tore it right down the middle and let the pieces fall onto the polished table. The sound echoed in the quiet room. There was an instant where no one spoke, every executive's eyes wide with shock. The awkwardness from earlier had shifted. Now it was clear, unmistakable anger and disbelief filling the air. Some people sat frozen, hands halfway to their coffee cups, while others looked back and forth between Michelle and James, not sure what to do next. Michelle took a long breath, keeping her focus steady. She did not flinch or try to pick up the torn invitation. Instead, she spoke up, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the tension. She said clearly that what just happened was not just about her. James's outburst was a signal of a much bigger issue at play. She pointed out that real problems with respect and inclusion had been allowed to simmer under the surface for years, disguised as business as usual. For the first time, the company had to face what it really looked like. The room fell silent, every executive sitting back in their chair, thinking about what Michelle had just said. It was obvious her words struck a nerve. They looked at each other, then down at the shredded invitation on the table, realizing this was bigger than any single meeting or policy. Some shifted uncomfortably, understanding that staying quiet was really just letting problems grow worse. For years, people had overlooked moments like this, chalking up bad behavior to stress or personality quirks. Now, Michelle's calm honesty made it clear it could not go on. No one tried to speak right away. Even those usually quick to talk over others stayed quiet, caught off guard by how the situation had spiraled and how plainly the truth was laid out. For once, there was no cover to hide behind. Everyone there knew nothing was going to be quite the same after this point. Without waiting for anyone to respond or apologize, Michelle simply gathered her bag and walked out of the conference room. The door closed behind her with a soft click. But it sounded final. The board sat frozen, still piecing together what had just happened. James, on the edge of the table, tried to look composed but could not shake the feeling he had crossed a line he would not come back from. After only a few minutes, the boardroom door opened again. This time, Michelle stepped back in, but she was not alone. Walking beside her was Karen, known in the entire industry as the president of the Global Investment Board. Her reputation for making things happen was well known, and the simple sight of her entering the conference room made even the most outspoken executives sit up straighter and go quiet. It was like the air changed instantly. There was a hush that settled over the room, and everyone seemed to know something big was about to happen. Karen did not waste any time. Without even sitting down, she spoke in a steady, clear voice. "After careful consideration," she said, "the board has decided that Michelle will be the new CEO of this company. She has full authority from this moment to address the issues around our culture and make any changes she sees fit." Her words were direct, leaving no space for questions or arguments. There was genuine shock among the group. Even those who were not fond of change looked completely caught off guard. No one, though, was more stunned than James. He suddenly looked small in that big chair, realizing in just a few moments that everything had changed and he was no longer in control. Karen stood at the head of the table, pausing just long enough to let her words settle. She glanced around the room, then focused on James for a moment, her gaze leaving no doubts. Karen made it clear that Michelle had not been chosen simply because she knew how to run the business. Michelle was there because she lived by a code of integrity and ethical values, something the company needed more than ever right now. Karen did not raise her voice or draw out her speech, but everyone present felt the shift. Gone were the days when looking the other way or hiding behind office politics would be accepted. The message landed especially hard on James. He tried to look composed, but Karen's pointed look made it obvious that his standing would no longer protect him. A sense that things were really about to change crept over everyone in the room. For those who had relied on old habits, there was a new sense of worry and uncertainty, as if a protective shield had just been pulled away. Their confidence faded, replaced by an uneasy pause. Michelle, now officially in charge, faced her team with steady resolve. She promised practical steps, not just words, to rebuild a culture of respect and fairness, inviting everyone to join her in making real change together. Michelle did not waste a moment taking the reins. Still standing in front of everyone, she pulled a folder from her bag and laid it on the table. Inside was a confidential audit report the board had been quietly preparing for weeks. She handed out copies, making sure each executive had one to read. The report was direct and did not sugarcoat anything. It laid out a pattern of serious ethical violations, going into detail about cases of discrimination and abuse of power from some of the company's most senior people. At the very top of the list was James's name, with documented evidence linking him to some of the worst incidents. The effect was immediate. You could sense the shock rushing through the room as people flipped through the pages. Michelle read key sections out loud so nobody could avoid facing the facts. Suddenly, every bit of resistance faded away. There was no more room for excuses. James, completely out of words, just sat there frozen. He did not even try to deny the findings. Security was called, and within minutes, James's computer access was blocked. He was quietly led out of the boardroom by 2 guards. Others watched in silence, their relief mixed with disbelief that something like this could come to an end so quickly after years of silence. Michelle was not finished making her point. After the room had settled from James's sudden departure, she took a moment to connect her laptop to the projector at the end of the table. Soon, photos of Mark from the front desk and Linda, one of the security managers, appeared on the large screen. Michelle explained that changing the company's culture meant starting right at the front doors, that real respect could not start only at the top. She shared that recent complaints and interviews revealed a pattern of poor treatment and discrimination by staff members who should have been the most welcoming. There was a quiet shock as she announced on the spot that both Mark and Linda were being let go, effective immediately. It was not just the high-level executives facing consequences now. Michelle was making it clear that every employee, no matter their role, would be held to the same standard. Those sitting around the table exchanged uneasy glances, realizing this was more than just a shake-up among senior management. Michelle spoke steady and direct, underlining her point. This is not about targeting a few people. It is a promise. We will have honesty and respect everywhere, from the way guests are greeted to the decisions made in this room. The mood shifted as people started to understand real change had finally arrived. Determined to make sure the changes would stick, Michelle rolled out a new policy for everyone in management. She explained that from now on, every manager in the company, no matter how long they had been there or how much money they earned, would have to complete a mandatory ethics and leadership program. It was not just a formality. Participation was required, and everyone's team would be able to review them anonymously afterward. Those reviews would count for a lot, directly affecting promotions, year-end bonuses, and even their position at the company. Michelle walked them through how it would work, making it clear there would be no loopholes or favors. Real honesty would drive all decisions from now on. The people in the room listened, realizing that what they were hearing was not just temporary, and that what was happening now would set the tone for the entire organization going forward. Michelle's message left no one guessing. From this point, consequences would come for anyone who crossed a line, regardless of seniority. A respectful, tense quiet settled in. Some looked nervous, while others just nodded in agreement. The leadership finally understood this really mattered. Complacency was no longer an option, and their actions would mean more than their titles under Michelle's leadership. Over the next several weeks, the company truly began to feel different. Michelle made it a point to get out of her office and spend time in every department, whether it was the bustling marketing floor or the quiet corners of IT support. She talked to people one-on-one, not just managers, but folks who had spent years feeling overlooked. She invited them to share their thoughts on what was working and what needed to change. It was not just for show. Michelle remembered their names and even brought up their ideas in the next big meetings. For the first time, some employees who had never been noticed before got the chance to take the lead on new projects. Michelle promoted a team leader from customer service who others had ignored for years, and she recognized a recent college graduate in operations for a creative idea no one else took seriously. These small shifts sent a strong signal that things were different now and that recognition was no longer reserved for the usual favorites. Slowly, trust started to grow among the staff. People who once kept quiet began speaking up, offering real suggestions or volunteering for bigger projects. The old habits, where only a select few had a say and the rest stayed in the shadows, were finally fading away. While the whole company was going through real change, things were very different for James outside the office. At first, he was stubborn about letting go of his position, ignoring Michelle's offer to leave with dignity. But after some time away from the spotlight and deep talks with people close to him, he started to realize how much damage had been done, and that holding on to the past would only make things worse. Eventually, James decided to accept the arrangement Michelle had suggested, finally closing that chapter of his career. Months later, he quietly reappeared, but not in another executive seat. Instead, he stepped into classrooms around New York City, speaking with students about morals, facing up to mistakes, and why it matters to treat others respectfully. In these talks, he did not try to sugarcoat what had happened. James admitted to his errors, described what led to them, and spoke about the difference Michelle's new leadership had made for him personally. One day, a short video of James sharing his story with a group of teenagers began spreading online. He talked openly about change, forgiveness, and how the company had inspired him. It quickly struck a chord, showing everyone that real transformation is possible. James and Michelle, each in their own way, left a lasting mark, proving that courage, empathy, and rebuilding are not just words, but actions that can spark hope far beyond any single workplace.